Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. It has been far too long since we have had one of these sessions. Good afternoon. And oh, you know what? I should probably mute myself over there as well, so you're not getting that.
Gotta mute.
Hold on. You think it was my first time doing this, right? There we go. You don't have the background music going on now. Sorry about that. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Doing good, man. That intro music, I'm not musical at all, but it got me whipping out my bass, air bass guitar. That was pretty cool.
It was pretty
cool. We have a little video editor that I've been using for a bunch of other stuff, and he's like, "Hey, let me make you a video." I was like, "Okay." So yeah, Mr. Ryan, the traveling dude. How you been, my friend?
Good, man. It's good to be here. Been on the road, participating in a bunch of those Huntress on the road shows. So been seeing a lot of partners out there. I saw you guys a couple times. So good to be back in the home office and back with you guys. It's been a while. Feels like it's been a while.
What was the was it a baseball game, or was it the car? What was one of the Huntress things that you went to? It was the cars. I mean, David was showing me pictures of cars and stuff. Did you go to that one?
I didn't get to do the car one, unfortunately. So some of the team did. They got to drive like Lamborghinis and some Ferraris, a bunch of exotic cars. So that was super cool. Huntress knows how to throw a party. Shout out. I actually got to go to the Ford Field in Detroit, actually where I'm from here in Michigan. It wasn't too far from me. So that was really cool to see Detroit Ford Field. And then second week of June, I'll be in Cleveland with those guys over at the Hard Rock Hall of Fame. So awesome. On the road, spreading the word, talking about cybersecurity, and yeah, excited to be back in the home office for a bit, though.
Awesome. Well, why don't we dive in? Mr. Brian, how are you? Take a second, say hello, do all the things.
Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm Brian Blakely. I'm Chief Risk Officer and Compliance Strategist at Compliance Scorecard, and I've spent the better part of the last few decades helping MSPs translate security and compliance into real business value. Right today, I work directly with MSPs really across the globe to build client-aligned risk and compliance programs that don't just tick boxes, right? They protect revenue and drive trust. So I'm thrilled to be here with Tim and Ryan, with all of you, because this topic, right, bringing our clients into risk conversation is at the heart of what I believe separates a reactive IT provider from a strategic advisor. And that's exactly where we're headed next and throughout today's time together.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you so much, as always. I think I like this view for the moment. Yeah. So, Ryan, you've been traveling a lot. Why don't you come up, say hello? How are you? All the fun things.
Yeah. So Ryan Seymour here, VP Consulting Education at Connect Secure. I've been working with our partners for the better half of the last 20 years in the MSP industry, consulting, doing support, doing engineering work. Most recently now in the cybersecurity space. So really happy to be here with the partners talking on behalf of Connect Secure, working with Compliance Scorecard. I see a lot of names here that I recognize, so it's nice to see some new names and some that I recognize. So yeah, nice to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I suppose I should take a second and say hello as well. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. We're really excited to have you here on MSP Thought Leadership. I'm Tim Golden, founder and CEO of Compliance Scorecard, where we help your MSP have the risk conversation with your customer. We're excited to be joined by our good friend Ryan at Connect Secure as we talk about prioritizing vulnerabilities. And of course, without further ado, Brian Blakely as well. So why don't we just dive right in? I'm just going to pull up my show notes here real quick. And the first topic is really around, prioritizing the vulnerabilities, but ones that don't disrupt business, right? And so, Mr. Bryan, you always have some great insight about whether it's CVSS. Wait, isn't that a pharmacy, or EPSS? No, wait, that's no, way too many acronyms for the acronym guy here, right? Really wanting to be able to understand how most clients don't care per se about all the acronyms. They want to know, how does it tie into my business? How does it protect our risk? So, Mr. Blakely, why don't you give us some thoughts around that?
Yeah, Tim, thanks. And exactly right, spot on, right? Clients don't wake up worrying about CVSS scores. They worry about outages. They worry about revenue loss. They worry about reputational damage. And that's why, if we're not pulling the client into the conversation, when you think about risk registers and all the other things that come out of vulnerability scans, they're fundamentally flawed or incomplete. So think about it. Your client, our clients, right, knows their businesses better than we ever will, right? They know which applications drive revenue, which systems keep operations running and humming, and which vendors they can't afford to lose. So without their input, we're left assigning criticality and impact based on assumption, right? Often through a very technical lens. So how do we fix that? So if you think about like your QBRs or whatever you call them, don't treat them like a report card, right? Instead, use them to ask better questions, targeted questions. Questions like, which systems, if they went down for a day, would cost you the most, right? That has nothing to do with the CVSS score, right? What's your busiest time of the year? Some of our clients are seasonal. Know their business and understand how that technology supports it. I always like to ask, are there any upcoming changes, right? Our clients face economic headwinds and mergers, audits, new clients, all that kind of stuff. Ask them how we should change maybe how we think about risk in their environment. So if you structure those conversations around those business-driven inputs and show a simple living kind of risk register from those vulnerabilities, not a spreadsheet graveyard, but a real living, breathing risk register, right? We're mapping risks that the vulnerabilities create in the environment, right, to their critical business functions, the business functions that drive revenue, not just their servers. Last thing I'll say here real quick, as I think of this, you want to assign a shared accountability, right? We'll talk a little bit about that too as we go through some of the topics, but make sure there's clear owners and timelines and mitigation strategies that involve you and your client. Because when clients help build where you've articulated the vulnerabilities, not in CVSS scoring, but in terms of real business risk, right? And you involve your client and you help them build a risk register around that, they're much more likely to act on it. They see their fingerprints on it, on that plan, right? And that's where, in my opinion, real risk reduction and trust happen.
Thanks, Brian. You really had me at, I'm going to paraphrase, your QBR should not be a report card. And I think about that, and I think of there's a lot of people that talk about quarterly business reviews. I like to use the word technology, or TBR, technology business review. And it shouldn't be how many tickets we closed and how many, XYZs
That's
we
table
reviewed.
stakes. Yeah.
It's all that stuff can be a monthly darn report, as you were saying, Brian, diving into the what do I need to do to protect my business? And Ryan, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would really echo strongly with where Brian led, is identifying your customers' critical business assets. That is so key in the entire vulnerability management program or policy that you run, right? At Connect Secure, that's what we do every day, all day. We hear about vulnerability issues. We see new exploits come out. We see new scores come out. We see severity changing constantly. And I think what I've witnessed is a lot of MSPs that are chasing after severity of the CVSS score, or the severity of the EPSS and the exploit score, And there's other threat intelligence metrics you can look at, but I see a lot of partners really focusing on, hey, I just want to take care of all the severity things, right? I'm going to focus there. And sometimes when you take a step back and you look at the data we've gotten and the stories we hear about machines that have been compromised due to vulnerability exploit, which is on the rise, by the way. If y'all haven't seen the Verizon DBIR that was published this year, one of the key takeaways in that was the rise of vulnerabilities, right? We've seen vulnerability exploits surpass phishing attacks for the first time, which is, to me, is a big deal, especially in our space. That really hits home for us. So when we think about vulnerability management, it's not just about chasing severity. And I heard a really interesting story from a red team that does pen testing in the space for quite a long time. And they gave me a really, I won't tell you the full story, but the moral and the golden nugget I took away was they saw a customer's environment get compromised over a vulnerability, one that was low and one that was medium. And at a glance, from a severity lens, those didn't seem like big deals. One low, one medium, but the low and the medium combined together created a highly exploitable issue, which led to credential compromise. So again, if you're just staring and chasing down high, low, EPSS says high, low, you might be leaving on the table some vulnerabilities that are actually more impactful to your customer's environment than through your tech lens. We've all got great tech lenses. So I would still use the tech lens, but you also have to make sure that on that initial discovery, when you first onboard a customer, I think those questions have to be asked early on in the relationship. And it creates a bond with your customer where you're becoming an advisor, right? I learn my customer's business from a revenue impact standpoint. Most of your customers are in business to make money. I'll exclude the education sectors and nonprofits, but I don't see that being the lion's share of our partners' customers. So in the SMB world, where companies are built and want to make money, our greatest advantage is to learn how they make money. What systems do you use? Systems go beyond hardware that we can see with our scanners. Another great explanation is like all the web applications that we see in the new modern cloud and virtualized worlds. You know, sometimes we run into customers that just don't have servers anymore, and we say, well, where do you store your contacts? Salesforce, HubSpot, online. Do your RMM tools scan that? Vulnerability tools scan that. Those are attack surfaces that are being exploited regularly. And I think the other thing we have to consider is they're always expanding now. That attack surface grows every day with new web apps, new servers that come online, new environments that we're building are all opening up more attack surface for everyone to secure. So I think through that lens, I would preach the message of use that discovery session and your QBRs with your customers and your prospects to learn about their business so you can make sure when you identify those assets that you're going to scan and talk about, that they are tied back to their business. And we don't talk about CVSS score and severity to our customers. We talk about how we reduced risk on the machine that does all of the work at the business. So I like to really focus there.
Yeah, the reducing the risk, I think, is really, you know, the crux of the conversation, right? It's not, you know, the scoring and like there's always going to be vulnerabilities. We know that, right? Do we talk about the whole MITRE thing and how it disappeared and then it came back 24? Like, let's not get there. But, you know, I'm going to kind of approach this as I always do from the top, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, at least from my perspective, how policy and procedure ties into this, right? Because, you know, that's what I do. And so, you know, when I think about, you know, compliance and I think about the risk that comes around that, I obviously want to be able to build out a vulnerability management program which consists of a policy, which consists of a SOP, which consists of KPIs and metrics, right? Being able to identify and stay in line with the things that we say we should be doing. Oh, we deal with criticals in X number of seconds. We deal with lows in X number of years. Yes, I'm speaking facetiously on purpose. But being able to start at the very top, right? The roadmap, right? The very first on-ramp into a vulnerability management program is define your policy, define your procedure, define some metrics that are obtainable, right? Don't set yourself up for failure, but define some metrics that are, and CIS has a lot of great guidelines on critical, high, medium, low, EPSS scores, CVSS score, all the scoring components that go around that. From our perspective, start with a policy. Why are you doing this? Oh, we want to, as Brian said in the beginning, protect critical assets. If I'm a baker, I care about my freezer. And I probably have IoT devices tied to that, Dean brings up a really great question. How do we manage those that we cannot manage because they might not be manageable? So we would need to, as we build out our policies, our procedures, and our scoping, kind of have some conversation around, we can't patch the thermometer, but we are monitoring the thermometer because we need to know the temperature so that we don't lose the eggs and the milk and all the other fun stuff. But Dean does bring up a really good question here about, how do we deal with the random Linux nonsense?
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that at ConnectSecure, right? We see a lot of IoT devices that are Linux-based, non-traditional devices, right? You brought up an example of one of those, the thermometers. There's 100 of them in your home probably right now. Coffee pots, the washer, the fridge, the little pictures that have all the photos that go on there.
Three phones.
2 tablets, 9 Xboxes, whatever. I mean, it's everything that connects. So from at least my lens, I think you have to have something that's regularly, continuously scanning and identifying what devices are on this network. What do I even know is here that has an IP address, has a port, has a MAC address? I call that a heartbeat. If you have those 3 attributes, my scanner should see you. That's the first step, is what is it? And then I think beyond that, if you have credentials to stuff, great, we can authenticate. You might be able to get some of the better details. But I think just again, going back to what if we don't know what it is, the bare minimum is a continuous Nmap type of scan on a network, where I can at least say, I see a device here, and I'll go hunt it down. And sometimes you got to roll your sleeves up, and we got to do things the old-fashioned way and go find where that device is at, right? Or you turn it off from the router, the firewall level, and you block it, right? And then someone will come forward and say, hey, Ryan, my thing stopped working. I had it on my desk, and it doesn't work anymore. It turns out it's a Bluetooth Wi-Fi connected coffee thermos that connects to my Wi-Fi so I can control the temp of it, like Tim said, right? Weird stuff. We see those all the time in scans. So again, I think just having awareness, which I think goes back to CIS Control 1. Asset management, right? But do asset management, you got to have something that is running a scan. So dual purpose, a tool like a vulnerability scanner to do both of those things for you, right? Get a vault scan and identify what assets are even in your environment, because that's your attack surface.
Yeah, I mean, what happens in the wild here that's criminal that Dean brings up is oftentimes MSPs, they say, hey, that's not in our scope. We don't manage that stuff over there. And that to me is criminal. I think not bringing up and saying, like Ryan shared a little bit about mapping vulnerabilities to assets, but the real magic happens taking that step further and start mapping assets to business functions. And if you've got a critical business function that involves the thermometer, right, then you need to ask questions. And Ryan just brought that up, right? Don't say, oh, that's managed by the website people, or that's a Linux box. We don't touch that. We don't have anything to do with that, right? The idea here is, hey, what is that asset doing within this function? If it's not critical, maybe it's a different conversation. But if it is, I mean, everything is connected these days, right? Everything. Think about the years ago, the casino that got taken down because of the entry point was the aquarium, right? The aquarium operational technology on that, right? And then once they're in, bad actors move east and west, right? So I think what happens oftentimes as MSP is that's not an asset under management. So, my vulnerability scanning is not going to run on it, or I don't care about that VLAN and some of this other stuff. And that to me is just you're missing potential risk that could impact your client's revenue. And just because it's not an asset under management or that you're not directly supporting it, doesn't mean that it's not going to create risk or make a bad day for you and your client.
Yeah, I love this, Dean. So one of the things that we had at our MSP was if electricity flows through it, it's IT's job to deal with it. I like this. If it pulls an IP, it must be known to me.
Shout out, Dean. I like that. That's a great comment. If it has an IP and a MAC address and then a port and I see it, it needs to be documented whether we manage it or not, because it's an opportunity. And it's an opportunity on both ends. It's an opportunity to reduce risk by either taking it over control and managing it, or getting the customer to sign off and say, hey, Mr. Customer, I found these devices on your network that are regularly here. You don't want me to manage them, so you must sign off saying we've disclosed it as an attack surface, and that may reduce risk to the MSP in some way, shape, or form.
Well, throw that thing on the risk register. That's one of the things. Have that visibility and create at least that awareness for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All good.
So, kind of tying this back to, our original conversation of risk to revenue, why we're here, and thinking about how we're prioritizing vulnerabilities. Brian, you really kind of hit the nail on the head with, yeah, it might have a vulnerability, but it's probably not important to the business, or maybe it is. Like, that's the conversation MSPs need to be able to start to dive into. Ryan, as you said, have a discovery tool, right? Being able to pull from that discovery tool, like what all the things are, right? If it has an IP, it must be known to me. Or like we used to say, if electricity flows through it, it's our job to deal with it. So discover the stuff. Take that to the next level and determine HVA, right? Probably a term you haven't heard of in a while, which is high value asset. What are the high value assets? If I'm a baker, it's going to be my ovens. It's going to be my freezers and my coolers and like those kind. And
could be your phone.
Could be my phone. Could be my POS system. And a lot of those things are IoT, right? The thermostat monitoring the, as we talked about. I'm going to bring it all the way back to your managed service agreement, your MSA. What's in scope? What are you doing? And what are you responsible for? Because chances are your customer probably just assumes you're dealing with it for them. Or they might just randomly plug in their own thing and be like, hey, it stopped working, whatever. So as I think about protecting the revenue streams and identifying those high value assets, and then the vulnerability components of those assets. I mean, you mentioned it, Brian. A thermostat got hacked and MGM got took down, right? The fish tank thing, right? And we'll go back however many years. Just because it's a dumb thermostat in a fish tank doesn't necessarily mean it isn't, Ryan, an attack surface. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left here. We tend to try to wrap these up with some key takeaways. Ryan, are you good for your key takeaway?
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I would say I'll kind of just reiterate and beat the drum because it's so important. And it's such an easy thing to do for the MSPs out here is focus on understanding and tagging and organizing your critical business assets for your customers. And I don't want to steal Brian's thunder, but take it that second step further after that and map those to those functions. And I think you do that by asking the right questions. not technical questions. We're really great at getting the technical answers from our tools and our industry expertise, and we all should be able to do that. What we're not good at is determining how our customers are actually making money and what processes and functions that the business has and how those correlate back to the assets, to the enterprise assets, right? Whether that's hardware, software, systems, controls, compliance. I mean, that journey goes on. So takeaway for everybody would be challenge yourselves to make sure that your asset management has a proportion of how does it map to the customer's function and affect risk, so that you're not blindly chasing vulnerabilities down based on severity scores. You gotta have some context behind the customer. So that would be my takeaway.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. Mr. Blakely, my friend, you always have some really good nuggets. And yeah, before you dive in there, I know, Dean, I'm going to smash all my electronics, not hide in a cave. I'm going to go back to the grocery store and stock shelves. Mr. Blakely, my friend.
Yeah, and I'll really just build off what Ryan just shared too. But those of you that know me and follow me, I'm all about the business and the business impact, right? And having a way to take technical stuff and jargon and TLAs, three-letter acronyms, and translating those in something actionable that the client can respond to and resource and shrink their risk, right? So I like the word Ryan just used, challenge. So I'm going to build on that. And I leave everyone with one clear, practical challenge for this coming quarter, right? You've got some time to plan, but for quarter 3, add one business impact question to your QBR, or whatever you call it. Tim talked a little bit about QBR. We don't want those to be a report cards. They should be a conversation with the client. So add one business impact question to every QBR, just one. Ask what part of your business can't afford to go down. Ask your client that. Or which system is most critical to keeping money flowing or clients happy, right? That's the stuff your customers and your clients care about. And from my experience, that one question opens the door to what I'll call a real risk conversation, not about tickets closed or mean time to patch vulnerabilities and all that kind of stuff, but having a real sit down business risk conversation, and one that's client driven, not just MSP delivered. And you don't need a new platform or full blown framework to start. You need curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to listen and learn. So we talked a little bit about risk ownership too. And here's the mindset from my perspective. Stop owning 100% of the risk conversation, because when you do that, your clients check out. I've seen it, right? They assume, again, we've got it covered. It plugs in a wall. Therefore, the MSP takes care of it. But when they check out, that's when gaps grow. So when you're involving your clients, right, and when clients help identify and prioritize risks, they also buy into the solution, right? You've translated the vulnerabilities to assets. You've tagged the assets that are part of critical business functions. You can have a conversation that your clients resonate with because you're speaking their language. They feel ownership. And that's where collaboration happens. That's what moves us from vendor, right, to trusted partner. Shared risk creates shared responsibility. And shared responsibility builds trust. And that's the foundation of every sticky, lasting MSP relationship. So this quarter or next, don't just send a report, start a conversation. Tim?
Oh my goodness, you hit the nail on the head when you said MSPs own all the risk. Sorry, I've been barking up that tree for the better part of a year. So as far as my key takeaway, I'm always going to try to tie it back to start with your managed service agreement, your scope of work, and your statement of work, and the service catalog of what you're doing, so you know what's in scope. Bring that all the way through, as Brian said, tying that to the assets, the critical assets that run, or HVAs, right? High value assets. Tie those high value assets to the business functions, right? Conduct a business impact analysis to determine Hey, I'm a baker and I care more about that thermometer in my freezer than I do about my spatula, right? Being able to tie that back to the businesses that you are working with as an MSP. You know what this all means? You actually have to talk to your customer, right? You have to actually get away from the computer and like pick up the phone and have a conversation with
What's this,
them.
witchcraft? What is this, Tim?
Oh, and so my challenge between now and when we meet next, and I'm going to share that here in a second, is pick up the phone and call your best customer and just ask them questions about their business, right? Not what keeps you up at night, but flip that on a positive spin. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What drives you to make the donuts? And let them talk and listen and ask questions on understanding their business, because then you'll be able to tie that back to the risk and you'll be able to help them protect their revenue. Any other last words before I share about what's coming up here in the coming weeks?
Nicely said.
Yeah. Well done.
All right. So let me share this real quick. So we are back. I know we took a little time off here, but we are back on our regular cadence every other week now. We've kind of put some things in place so that when Ryan is over at Ford's, and driving Lambos and Brian's over at basketball games and I'm, I don't know, going to Africa or whatever, we put some things in place to make sure that we don't miss one of our sessions every other week. With that being said, in 2 weeks from now, we have our good friend Jesse Miller coming in. And he has this really interesting thing about using AI, right? And we're really excited. So June 5th, you can sign up on LinkedIn, or you can always go to mspthoughtleadership.com, where all of these things will be shared after. Now we actually have a podcast, so you can listen on your favorite Apple, Spotify, all the podcast players as well after the show airs. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to come in and listen to us. We're excited to kick this back off with our regularly every other week schedule now. So thank you so much, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
Subscribe now.